All right. This is the Jump Search Talent Show, Recruiter Revealed series. And we have today special guest, Ann Futch. And we're really excited to have her. And we'll be talking about all the sort of the trying to demystify what recruiting and, the recruiting process is all about. And, we started this a few months ago. And we had, this is our third one, Ann. And, we had a lot of interest. Based on a lot of feedback that we received. And what really prompted us to start this was, I've been working with a lot of uh, job seekers and people that are transitioning their careers right now, and it's a tough time, especially in tech. There's an abundance of great talent out there, and there's a lot of folks that are looking for the next opportunity. Many of these folks are just they're new to a job search. They've always been recruited somewhere, and so they've never had to really polish up a resume or work on their employer or their personal branding on LinkedIn, for example. And so a lot of these folks are sort of navigating this new landscape. Um, it's new to them. And so, as a recruiter, I've seen a lot of folks struggling with, how do they interact with, how do they work with the recruiter, how do they manage their expectations, and how do they, at best, how do they partner with them to really ensure that they are finding the right opportunities and they're sort of maximizing the potential for those opportunities through their job search, through their negotiations, interview process, and all that. And so, as you and I know, and recruiters can be a huge advocate or champion on your behalf as a job seeker. The trick is figuring out how do we sort of tap into that, right? How do we as job seekers tap into that,
Sure.
right? And so that's the point of this Recruiter Revealed series. And so, for the audience out there, we've invited folks to Riverside. We had some technical difficulties with the live stream, and so hopefully you're able to join us here in Riverside. And hopefully, maybe if the stream gets caught up by LinkedIn, then folks will be able to join us through that channel as well. Anyway, we will be publishing this on Spotify afterwards, so folks will have a chance to watch it. I guess not live. For folks out there that are in Riverside, feel free to drop questions in the Riverside chat, and we'll try to get to them as best as possible. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Ann and give a little bit of background. So Ann is a friend of mine. She lives in Park City, which is just down the road from me. She's the founder of Sierra Advisory Group, a financial services recruiting firm that she started back in 2003, 2004-ish. Is that right, Ann?
Yep, that's right. That's
All
right. 20 years ago.
20 years ago, 2 decades. So Ann has a lot of experience, and we're looking forward to her sharing that with us today. And so, Ann has done most of the work that she does is analyst through managing director level searches for her clients, who typically are investment banks, advisory boutiques, private equity firms, VC firms, and alternative asset managers. She founded an alternative investor network for over 150 investment professionals in Park City and surrounding areas. And, she did all this after pivoting her career from investment banking, where you were working for 10 plus years in investment banking. Is that right, Nan?
Yeah, spanning over 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, anyway, not to go too deep, but just want to thank you for joining us. And you obviously have some wonderful experience in investment banking, and you have a very focused niche in recruiting in financial services. But that said, I think there's a lot of information and a lot of wisdom you can impart on me and our audience. So I'm looking forward to diving into this. We've talked about a bunch of questions that we have that we've sort of curated from different channels, and so hoping to kind of dive into those now. So again, anyone in the audience out there in Riverside, feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to them as well. We'll probably be going for the next 45 minutes or so. And so anyway, welcome, Ann. I've been doing enough talking here. Welcome.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much for having me on, Eric. I really appreciate it. This is going to be super fun. I also am thrilled that we finally found a way to collaborate.
Yeah.
So for those of you out there, Eric and I have been chatting for a while now. or for years, I should say,
Yeah.
and we recruit in different areas of very different areas, but have always wanted to collaborate. So here we are. I like this,
Yeah.
and I will say too, I'm focused on searches in the financial services space. So think investment banking, think Wall Street. I'm actually sitting in New York today, but there are a lot of cycles in financial services. So there are a lot of throughout my career, my history, I've seen many cycles where people have gotten laid off and been in the position that many of you may be in today, where you're out there seeking a job. So hopefully, I can provide some insight as to how to navigate this time in your career.
Yeah, the cycles is something that's sort of ebbing and flowing right now, and
Hmm.
from a tech perspective, there's a huge abundance of great talent out there right now, and we're hoping that some of what we discussed today will be quite practically applicable for a lot of the folks out there. So
I
um,
hope so too.
yeah. So why don't we dive in? So we have a bunch of questions here. We'll try to kind of not rapid fire, but sort of semi-rapid fire, and I'll lead the conversation in terms of trying to go a little bit deeper where I feel it's appropriate. And
Hmm.
but one thing that I'm curious about is you pivoted your career. I just mentioned this,
Yeah.
from investment banking into recruiting, and there's a lot of folks out there right now that are considering a pivot, and
Hmm.
would love to talk about that a little bit. As a recruiter as a person that in your own career who's pivoted from investment banking into recruiting, how did you
Hmm.
do that, and why did you do that, and what were some of the challenges, and how did you overcome them? But then also, like, what would you share for folks out there that are looking to pivot? Because as a recruiter, I'm sure you run into folks all the time that are pivoting, and right, how do recruiters look at folks that are pivoting? How do hiring managers look at them? So anyway,
Yeah.
would love to dive into there, and would love to hear a little bit about your story about your pivot.
Sure, absolutely. So my pivot was not necessarily planned, or I should say the need to change the career was planned, but what I went into was which was recruiting, was absolutely not even on my radar. And so I was in investment banking. As many of you may know, investment banking is a career path that leads to a lifestyle of a lot of work. And that pivot, both my husband and I were in that field. We had a newborn daughter, and it just was not sustainable for both of us to be working 100 hours a week and have a newborn. So I took some time off. Actually, at one point, I was laid off and was forced to take some time off. So and was exploring different paths of where I wanted to go next with my career. I had a lot of conversations with recruiters, actually, just trying to understand how I can do something different than what I had known and prepared for my whole career. Um, and I had one recruiter tell me, I had this idea that I'd go into sales, and I had one recruiter tell me, "Why would you do that when you have all of this value? You have deep industry knowledge. You're going to throw that away?" And that's always stuck with me because when we make a pivot in our career, we need to hold on to some aspect of our former career that is going to bring value to a new organization. So for me, it ended up being that my value was the knowledge of the investment banking industry. And I was approached by a recruiter that I had a very strong relationship with as a candidate to assist them on a freelance basis. And I took it. It wasn't that I planned the career and I didn't overthink it. I just said, okay, I need something to do today. So I'd like to do that. And with it was kind of a baby step approach, but it ultimately ended up being a so far 20-year career. I hope it's a 40-year career, and it's been very rewarding. So to answer your question, I think that the most important aspect is to recognize that the core values and skill sets that you have, and then think about how that could be applicable in another either industry or perhaps that how that knowledge base can be applied to another skill set.
Yeah, I think what that recruiter said to you about, throwing all that away,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's something that a lot of folks struggle with, right? If you're a senior software engineer, and it's just you're thinking about pivoting your career for whatever reason, how do you do that? And to look at, what skills are sort of portable and how does that align with the market? Um, I mean, it sounds like for you, you had an opportunity and you took it, but it doesn't sound like you overthought it too much, and you didn't have like a grand strategy for making this transition. You just saw an opportunity and you kind of took it, and it kind of where did it go from there?
So, Eric, I think that's a really good point. Is I always say, especially to people at the very beginning of their careers, the best way to figure out what you want to do is to figure out what you don't want to do. So just start doing something. And so, but I also think you do need to be strategic ultimately down the line. But it can be iterative and you can take baby steps. So for me, sometimes this career pivot takes some pretty big out of the box thinking of where is my skill set and how can I apply that in a different way. And so for me, it was presented to me and here's a way that you can help bring your value. And then as I started doing it, I realized, wait, I have a lot of value and I can really differentiate myself. So it was a bit iterative. And then I started having conversations with former colleagues where I said, "Hey, I think that I can bring some value in a very different way. What do you think?" And they validated my thought process on that.
Yeah.
And so that helped me form a strategy of I can be a recruiter in this space with a very differentiated approach because of all of my inside industry knowledge. And I was able to execute on it then.
But also, I mean, you mentioned the word relationships, right? Obviously, you had all this
Mm-hmm.
industry knowledge, but um, to what extent were those relationships that you had or have? To what extent was that sort of did that make that new career path possible for you?
It was critical, honestly. And it wasn't something that I initially recognized as a skill set of mine. But as I started having these conversations to do my due diligence on my potential next career path, I realized that those relationships were absolutely critical. And that's where I brought value. People would call me back because they knew me. And people would hire me because they knew me. And that is really the foundation of where I've taken my recruiting, is that it starts with people first and relationships first.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
yeah,
keep in mind, Eric, I started recruiting before there was LinkedIn. So relationships were the only way to go. And I
yeah.
still hold that very fundamental to the job search process, which we can get into later.
No, I love it. It's a perfect segue. So, talk to us a little bit about what you've seen in sort of past, present, future in terms of the evolution of recruiting. Because I think that would provide a little bit of context for what recruiting is today and how it's
Mhm.
evolving. And as a function of that, how do job seekers and people that are managing their career, and a lot of these job seekers will eventually find the right opportunity, and a lot of them will actually turn to recruiters to help them build their teams, right? And
Mhm.
so insight into what you've seen as far as the evolution, I think would be really interesting. So what have you seen in terms of past, present, future with respect to recruiting?
Absolutely. Technology has been a huge disruptor in this space, obviously. And, when I started recruiting, it was like, can you find the the general phone number for a firm? And there's a lot of research that was done initially to determine where people were sitting and what firms I would target.
Mhm.
And then I'd call the general number and just literally cold calling. Um, and then we started to get some technology on the scene where there were email blasts and email lists that would be sent out to certain pools of candidates. And then LinkedIn came into play. There was actually a precursor to LinkedIn called Dustang, if anyone remembers that. Um, but those founders are probably kicking themselves. They weren't the LinkedIn founders. But anyway, and then LinkedIn came to play, and it really disrupted recruiting. And there were some questions of if recruiters were even going to be needed. And for a small period of time, it probably really hurt the industry. I feel that now there's so much technology out there, it's overwhelming, and I'm sure that candidates probably feel this way too, where if you're searching for someone to hire, you get 1,000 emails or 1,000 applications on off of one post. And
Yeah.
I mean, how much time does one have when it's not your primary job to do that? So I think so now I think recruiters are even more important to help sort through all of that for a potential employer. And so it's been a big evolution, for better or for worse. I think that there's pros and cons. One aspect, I think, of being more technology driven is that it has put some recruiters in a different business model, where they're a bit more transactionally oriented, because they're trying to scale, and you scale by volume, and it's easy with technology to scale by volume. But it removes some of that relationship approach to the business for some firms. I think the larger firms who have scaled. There are still some recruiters out there with who have very much a more relationship-based model as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is the job of a recruiter? I know it's a simple question, but I know I would love to hear what your thoughts are. What is the job of a recruiter? What do they do?
Yeah. Well, I would say first and foremost, we're in a client service industry. So to answer that question is, what are the expectations of our clients? What do our clients want us to do? And for some clients, they want a volume of resumes. They just want the recruiter to produce a resume book with as many candidates as possible. And that's more of a transactional approach. For other clients, they want me to act as an arm of their firm and find them the perfect match. So, and that's more the types of searches that I take on. But generally speaking, the job of the recruiter is to be a matchmaker between an employer and an employee. And so finding the right talent for them. And to dig a little deeper into that, what does that mean? What is the right talent? Well, you need to find the right skill set, but you also need to find the right cultural fit. And that's where it gets a little bit artistic, from a job perspective, a matchmaking perspective.
Yeah. And to be clear, most external recruiting models out there are such that the recruiters are working for the client, the company that is hiring, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So most external recruiters are employed by the company. So that's our client who's hiring. And that's where I think that it can get confusing for a candidate is, where are your allegiances? And I think from my perspective, it's both, because candidates become clients someday. And if you don't know the candidate well, you can't service the need of your client and find that perfect fit.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head right there, because that we've seen that in our own business, where a lot of our candidates that we work with eventually become clients because you build a deep relationship with them. And, there are recruiters out there that value deeper, longer term relationships, obviously with clients, but also with candidates, because a lot of those candidates can become future employers, hiring managers, and so forth, right? And so just because a candidate doesn't fit for a particular role, they may fit another role, or they may even become a hiring manager that may retain your firm, right?
Absolutely.
And so how do recruiters make money? What are sort of the models out
Certainly.
there, and how is that even why is that even relevant to a job seeker or a candidate?
Certainly. So, how we make money. There are several different business models, but generally speaking, there's a retained search firm and a contingency search firm. The retained search firm is hired by the employer to execute a search, and they'll get a portion of their fee upfront before the search is even launched to do the work, and then they get paid once the the hire is made, the remainder of the fee. Usually, that fee is a percentage of the candidate's annual cash compensation. So, from a candidate, the candidate and the recruiter are aligned in that way, in that we want to get you the best terms possible that make for the right match. Then the contingency search firm is similar in although they are not paid upfront. So they only get paid if they're successful in their search. And other than that, even if they execute a search, if the hire is not made, they don't get anything.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see, and that may explain some of the behaviors too of some recruiters, is that it's, we don't get paid if a search isn't made and hire isn't made. So you may see some behaviors that are kind of, I don't know if the right word is desperate, but it comes off as being a little pushy because the recruiter's paycheck is dependent upon whether or not someone accepts an offer.
Would you say that's particularly more likely the case in a contingency model engagement?
Usually, yes, because in the retained situation, they're probably going to get paid regardless of which candidate. They're exclusive usually, so they're only
Yeah.
going to get paid if they will get paid no matter who ends up accepting the offer. Whereas contingency, sometimes you're not exclusive, so there may be candidates from other recruiters in the process as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when a client is working with contingency search firms, chances are they're working with multiple contingency search firms. And what we
Correct.
found, it creates sort of this dynamic where it's a bit of a race condition on the part of recruiters to just fill the pipeline to increase their probability of filling the position. And so there's maybe a little bit less, and this isn't always the case. I'm speaking generally, but um, sometimes we've seen that there's just a bit less focus on the relationship building with the candidate and vetting of the candidate because they have this time pressure to
Mm-hmm.
basically fill the pipeline before some other contingency firm is filling the pipeline, right?
Yeah. And so there's a question in the chat that's relevant to this about a recruiter ghosting you. Um, I think you can, assuming, you know what you say about assuming, but generally, if a recruiter is ghosting you, it is because they're incredibly busy on searches, and yes, you are not relevant for the current search that they're working on. It's unfortunate when that happens. I don't advocate for that at all. That's typically a sign of someone who's maybe not as relationship based in their approach to recruiting.
Yeah, and we've been seeing that a lot. I mean, that's one of the biggest complaints that I've seen among
Yeah,
job seekers right now is just getting ghosted. And
yeah.
they have a conversation. They might even be one or two interviews into the process, and then they don't hear
Mm.
anything. Like there's no closure. And I feel for folks out there. And yeah, it's. I mean, that said, like, is there anything? So one of the biggest things that I've seen is like folks are going through the interview process, even if it's just one interview with a recruiter, and then they get ghosted. They don't hear anything. They don't get an email or anything. There's just no closure. Um, is there any way to kind of mitigate that, maybe in advance or afterwards? How would you deal with that? And like, um, what are your
It's
thoughts
hard.
there?
Yeah, and I feel for you if you're in that situation. It's not how um, it's frustrating. I'm certain.
Yeah.
So I think ways to mitigate it would be to ask up front, what is the process? Do you know what the process will be like? Will there be follow-up, or when can I expect to be there to be follow-up? And then you should be proactive. If you haven't heard, you should reach back out to that recruiter, because they're busy and there's a lot of people that are inbounding to them, especially these days right now. So if you haven't reached back out to the recruiter to follow up, you absolutely should, and say, checking in, wanted to see where the process was. Am I still an active candidate?
Yeah.
If you don't hear back from them after that, I think to accept that with that as a response with grace. You never know when that recruiter may or may not come back to you. So you kind of have to take a deep breath and realize that it's part of the process. You are going to be told no a lot, and it's hard not to take it personally, but it is just the law of numbers right now.
Yeah. I think not taking it personally goes a long way. And I think part of what we're trying to do here is just shed a little bit of light in terms of, what's happening on the other side. So, for example, job seekers are typically managing a number of funnels for their job prospects, right? And but on the other side, the recruiters, maybe you could talk a little bit about this, and like what is the recruiter's experience when they're working with a client or a number of clients, and they're building pipelines too, right? And
Correct.
yeah,
So you may have, and every recruiting firm is different in terms of how they operate. Some recruiting firms operate with teams. So you may have a senior level recruiter who brings in the client, and then you have junior level recruiters who actually execute the search. And then you may have recruiting firms, which is more my model, where you have the senior level recruiter who manages it all and may have support from affiliate recruiters and helping to source candidates. But once that search gets launched and conversations start happening, that one recruiter is your point person for everything. So, if it's a larger firm with that model of the senior and junior level recruiters, you can imagine that there's sometimes communication gaps with some searches where the junior level recruiter that you spoke with and submitted your resume actually has no control over the process, and is not really that involved. They're passing off profiles.
yeah,
So and then at any one point in time, a recruiter could be managing 3 searches. They could be managing 10 to 15 searches.
mm-hmm.
So it is a busy time. And then it depends if the recruiter uses a lot of postings and puts their information out there. They're getting a ton of inbounds from candidates. So it sometimes the ghosting is simply a matter of, and most times probably it's a matter of overwhelmed inboxes, and to-do lists. And it's a poor excuse, but it maybe will help you have insight that it's not personal.
Yeah. It's interesting because when you're a job seeker and let's say you just get a call from a recruiter, um, there's such a wide spectrum of what kind of recruiter you could be dealing with.
Oh, for sure.
It could be a junior recruiter. It could be a more senior recruiter that has direct contact with the executive or hiring manager. It could be anywhere in between, right? And it could be someone that is more relationship based versus somebody that's just transactional and just trying to, aim for a certain number of whatever resumes submitted, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a candidate, and let's say I get a call from a recruiter, what's the best way for me to understand who I'm dealing with?
Absolutely. Excellent question. So I think asking some of those questions towards maybe the end of the conversation, so that it's not off-putting of, it, if you ask some of these questions up front, the recruiter is going to wonder if you're even interested in the conversation. But so once you get to know each other through your conversation, you maybe ask them towards the end, what will the process look like? Are you going to be my point person going forward? Who's running the search within your firm? I think those will give you, those three questions right there will give you a lot of insight as to whether or not this person actually has any, not, has that direct touch point with the company. And regardless of the answers, if you're interested in the job, move forward for sure. I think you're gonna find that in a job search, you're going to have to deal with all types of recruiters. So it's kind of a, spreading your wings as wide as you can go, but it'll help you manage your expectations, and that will help you not become as disappointed if and when you get ghosted or don't hear back, or the job turns out not to be real.
Yeah, no, I like that. What what influence does a recruiter have on a candidate's candidacy, and how can you
Certainly,
gauge that?
absolutely. So I think that a recruiter can be an incredible advocate for a candidate, especially if the recruiter takes a relationship-based approach. Because if they have a relationship-based approach, they're going to have that approach with the client and with the candidate. And so there's been examples in my career where I've had candidates who I've just really taken an interest in their background and want to help them get back on their feet. And I've had to convince my client to give this person a shot. And the only way I can do that is that the client knows me, trusts my judgment, and knows that I know the firm. So, and anytime I send a resume over to a client, I do a write-up and I say, here are the 10 points as to why this person fits your need. That tone of my write-up can dramatically influence the candidacy. So if I have a strong rapport with that candidate and they have treated me well and with respect and in a professional manner, then I can also communicate that to the client. I have another recruiter friend who says the way that you interact with every aspect of your interview process is a good window as to how you're going to interact in the job. So if I've had 5 conversations with you as a recruiter, and every time you've been incredibly respectful, you follow up with me, you're kind, then I know that I can represent you that way, because you're probably going to treat, if you're in a business that has clients, you're probably going to treat clients that way. So the follow-up question was how can someone know if they're dealing with that type of recruiter, or if they're a recruiter who's going to be an
Yeah,
advocate?
yeah,
Really, it's going to be through a gut feel of conversation. And if that person was asking questions that were from a point of curiosity and wanting to truly get to know you. I also think you can help a recruiter advocate for you by providing bullet points as to what, maybe there were some points, some projects you worked on that are particularly appropriate for this job. Hey, do you mind if I write up a few bullet points to help you present me? That's always welcome.
yeah,
To help the recruiter triangulate what's on your resume to what's on the job description.
yeah. I like that because yes, when a recruiter gets on a phone call with you as a candidate, they're trying to, obviously they want to sell you on the opportunity, but at the same time they want to vet you to see if there's a fit, right? And it's a common misconception, if that's the right word, that recruiters are just there to kind of keep you out, right? I think
Mm,
once a recruiter feels confident in what you have to offer, um, you know, they they want to move forward with you. Now it's their job to make a case for you, whether that's with the hiring manager or whoever's sort of next as part of the process. And so, to your point, to the extent that you as a job seeker or a candidate can make it easier for the recruiter to make a case for you, right? I mean, not to say you have to do their entire job for them, but if you can
right.
make it easier for them, then they're more likely to sort of advocate for you, and you're making it easier for them to advocate for you on your behalf.
Yeah.
right?
And I think, Eric, another point along this is to remember that we're aligned, right? If you are the right candidate for the job, we're aligned. I want you to get that job.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think that is that's super important. And then I also think having that candid conversation with the recruiter, am I the right person for this job? And being okay with the feedback that maybe no, you aren't, but there may be a job around the corner where you are.
yeah.
And so being honest about your skill set goes a long way to building that rapport with the recruiter.
I really love that question. And we talked about this a few minutes ago. Like one of the biggest complaints is like, oh, I'm not hearing back from the recruiter. Um, and so, yeah, that's difficult because it's sort of go, no go. But there's more to it that you could benefit from hearing back from the recruiter, which is the feedback that you're talking about, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is, am I a good fit for this role? Where am I falling short? And how does that translate into how you're perceiving what I bring to the market and how that fits with the market? Right. And so if you're, I don't know, just making this up, maybe I'm a director level person in XYZ, but I'm looking for this VP position, right? And so it's not a lateral, it's a move up, but the feedback that you can get from a recruiter about where you might be falling short for this particular VP opportunity is huge as a candidate, right? Because it gives you an area where you can kind of focus on, you can try to bolster it up. And maybe it's not overnight where you can move into a VP position, but maybe over the next year that you sort of develop those gaps. But if you could speak candidly with a recruiter about this and say, hey, where you can sort of partner with them and
Mm-hmm.
have sort of that candid conversation about where you stand and how they might perceive you, whether it's for this role or just in the bigger picture. That's so much more of I think of a compelling, meaningful conversation than you as a candidate just trying to pitch the recruiter and the
Yeah.
recruiter trying to poke holes. It's a little bit more adversarial.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it builds a longer term relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And the rapport that you could build in having that sort of heart to heart about, this is what I have to offer. This is where I stand, and the recruit and you being open to the feedback, right? Because a lot of times recruiters won't provide you that feedback unless you're either asking for it or they're 100% sure that you're open to it. You're asking genuinely. Because I've been bitten in the past,
Absolutely.
offering unsolicited feedback, because people could take offense to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Yeah, and I think that's something, yes, when you're talking to a recruiter, you do always want to present yourself in the best light, and you're selling yourself. So
yeah,
that's a skill, and that's something that you have to craft your story and learn how to present yourself. And that's a new skill for some people. I think you should view the recruiter as your ally in how to craft that story, because the recruiter has the market knowledge. And I'll be talking to candidates and I'll say, hey, you've done this, this, and this. Have you ever thought about using, all of those things have the same skill set? Have you ever thought about positioning yourself as someone who is a, since we're on relationships, a master of developing relationships, and you could be business development. So I think that the recruiter can very much be your partner in how you craft your story and where your skill set sits within what the market demands are today.
yeah, I love it. Let's take a brief break here, and as we look at
Sir?
the chat, there's a lot of stuff that's coming in here. So Leif, what's the best way to get on a recruiter's radar for consideration if they
Hmm.
don't have a list of open roles they work with online? What are your thoughts on that, Anne?
So um, it's a great question. And so if they don't have roles online, I would try to reach out to them on LinkedIn through a message, and provide your resume, and in a way that is out of you're inquiring out of curiosity more than a way that you're trying to push an agenda, because that open exploratory dialogue is likely to be better received and more authentically received than a here's my resume. Do you have any jobs for me?
Yeah. Yeah. That's probably one of the worst ways to sort of engage a recruiter, especially now because a lot of recruiters are getting inundated. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, the recruiters had to bang down doors to get candidates' attention. Now it's sort of flipped. The
Mm-hmm.
candidates have to bang down the doors to get any attention from the recruiters. There's a shortage of opportunities and lead job opportunities and leads in tech right now, and so the dynamics flipped a bit. Um, let's see.
And so maybe
Oh,
asking a recruiter there, just as a quick follow up,
yeah.
maybe asking a recruiter there, I would like to get your read on my skill set and where the market demands are, or something softer like that, where you're really asking for their insight. I think is going to get someone to respond a bit more often.
Yeah, yeah. And even people, I mean, a lot of the candidates we work with, they're sophisticated. They're
Hmm.
they're senior level folks, professionals, and so even when they approach like that, they're just the lack of response is just and it's tough. The recommendation that I try to make to folks is sort of engage with folks on LinkedIn by engaging with them on their content. So if you want to connect with a recruiter, chances are if they're producing content or engage with them on that, and
Hmm.
then there'll be some name association, some name familiarity. So when you do reach out to them, it won't be the first time they're seeing your name. And um, I know that works on me.
Hmm.
That works on me.
Yeah.
People,
Yep.
when people engage with my content, I see their name, like, oh, okay. And I see their name a few times. And then when they send me a direct message, like, oh, yeah, I'd be very
Yeah.
receptive to kind of engaging with them. So,
Yep.
so for what that's worth, Lynn, yes, this recording will be available. I apologize for the sort of the technical snafu with the actual LinkedIn live stream, but we will make this available on Spotify. Um, let's see, Vanessa. As a job seeker, is there any appropriate length of time to follow up with a recruiter after an interview? Is it unrealistic to hear within a week if there will be further interviews?
So I think that you should absolutely follow up within a week. Um, Mostly because I want to know as a recruiter, how did the interview go?
Mhm.
So, and I think if you don't follow up within a week, it's going to be a sign of disinterest to the recruiter, of your candidacy. So, absolutely, you should follow up with them. I would say within a day or two from your interview, just reporting back as to how the interview went, and then you can ask what what is the time frame where I should expect to hear back.
Yeah, I like that because uh, recruiters, they want to know where you stand. They want to know how did
Mhm.
your interview go, right?
Yes,
And depending
absolutely.
on who the recruiter is, like maybe less likely for a junior recruiter that has no line of sight to the decision makers, but for someone like Ann that has direct line of sight to the client and the hiring managers, they want to know how the interview went. They want to know, what did Bob ask in the interview? How
Yeah.
did he ask it? And did you guys go long on the call, right? And so
Hmm.
that's definitely something that a recruiter would value. And if you can add value to the recruiter as a candidate, right, you're just creating more surface area to connect and to build rapport. And so any excuse to add any value or just update the recruiter, I think goes a long way. Would you agree, Ann?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you think about it, in your example, Bob is my client. So when Bob calls me and wants to know, wants to talk about the interview that he just had, I need to be prepared as to whether or not that
Yeah.
candidate is actually interested in the job still.
Yeah.
So that follow up is hugely important.
Yeah. Let's see, Marin. Uh, what is the most effective way outside of a job posting to find out what is attractive to recruiters in my field? I'm currently navigating a career transition and want to tailor my skills, make enhancements if necessary, as effectively and efficiently as possible.
So, so if you know where what your career you're transitioning to, I would suggest networking within that field as much as possible on a person-to-person basis with just exploratory curiosity conversations, and then asking those people who good recruiters are in that space. Really getting a referral for a recruiter who can help you navigate a transition is probably the best way to go. You're going to get the highest rate of response, and the way that you can get referrals is by speaking with people in that chosen field. I think that anytime you're making a transition, you should be talking to as many people as possible, one-on-one, and I mean actually talking, not necessarily just online, and in fact, preferably not online, more face to face. And through those conversations, you can then start asking for referrals to recruiters in the space.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, recruiters do specialize, right? That's what I'm hearing,
Mm-hmm.
right, Ann?
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
and you have to know what niche or what scope a recruiter where they can add value, right? Because, like, for example, Anne is very focused on financial services talent,
Mm-hmm.
whereas,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I'm more on the tech side. We do hire like CFOs and folks, but it's a bit of a different specialization. And so, if somebody came to me and said, "Oh, I'm looking for an opportunity with a PE firm," I'd be like, "You need to talk to Anne," right? Because that's not my area of specialty, and I don't have the relationships
Mm-hmm.
there, nor do I have the domain expertise there. And so that's where I would, if you came to me like that, I would refer you to someone like Anne. So, let's see. Michael's question: as a recruiter, how much influence do you have over the often grandiose wish list of requirements for a given role? So it's sort of an extension of what we were talking about earlier, but
Yeah,
I'd love to hear your thoughts, Anne.
absolutely. So I always think of a recruiting process as a bit of there's some recruiting, and then there's some education. And it needs to, sometimes clients come to me with this wish list, as you're saying, of requirements that's just completely in la la land, right? And yeah, I would like that too, but I don't have that magic wand to produce that. So usually I start, this is just my approach, but I start off by saying, okay, well, that's, I hope we can find that person. What's most important on that? And then as the process goes along, I start to educate my client on where the market is. So we have candidates with this aspect of your requirements. We have candidates with this aspect of your requirements. Here's what I'm seeing in the market. And that's where a relationship with the client is very important. So the stronger my relationship with client, the more influence I have.
Yeah, it's an interesting point here because you you can't always make the assumption that the client knows what they're looking for, or that it's in line with what the market will sustain.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think a lot of candidates, when they look at a job description, they think that a lot of times that's it's well written, or it is sort of set in stone, and all this thought has gone into it, and any deviation from it that doesn't fit the mold, you won't fit in as a candidate. But a lot of times that's not even true. I've seen so many cases where a job description was created by copying and pasting from other job descriptions that they found,
Uh-huh.
and it's
Yes.
just like, and
Yes.
so, yeah,
Now AI can probably create these job descriptions,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
um, but don't let that deter you. If you have some of the requirements, if you have none of them, it should deter you. But if you have some of the requirements, explore that and say, hey, honestly, I don't have that, but what I think might be most important for this, you tell me, recruiter, I do have.
yeah,
Um, so the recruiter does have some influence on that, because our job is to really, I mean, as I was saying earlier, we're matchmakers. This is a marketplace. And so it is not, I always say this with compensation. What is market? Market is what you can get the candidate you want to accept the offer for. it doesn't really matter what other people are making, because if that candidate and you want that candidate doesn't accept the offer, then that's not market for that candidate.
Yeah.
So it is a marketplace. So a lot of what we are trying to navigate is how do we find the talent that's needed for the job? And sometimes the job description evolves
Yeah.
as they start talking to candidates.
I've seen that a lot. Seen that a lot. And
A
that's a good,
lot. Yeah.
in fact, that's a good question to ask a recruiter is, um, at some point to try to figure out like if this is a backfill position or why the position is open.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have they hired for this position before? I mean, aside from the
Mm-hmm.
person, I mean, it might even be a backfill position, it might be entirely new. So maybe they've never hired for the position before. So they don't really know what they're looking for yet. They have to go through some calibration cycles to figure it out, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
How many recruiters should a candidate or a job seeker be working with at any given time? Is there any thoughts there on strategy around that?
Um, I think it depends on where you are in your job search. If you are gainfully employed and you are being opportunistic about looking, you might want to be careful about how many recruiters you're talking to, because you don't want it necessarily to get out there that you're looking. So if you need to be very confidential about your job search, then you should definitely limit those conversations to recruiters that you trust and that you think will understand what you're looking for. If you are unemployed, everyone, assuming you can manage it. But I think you have to know that some recruiters will add more values than others. But just like applying online for jobs, your yield is not going to be terribly high, because recruiters are, each recruiter represents, who knows, 1 to 10 jobs that they're working on. And so it's just a numbers. It's a calculation. So I think as many as you can handle if you're looking for a job, and knowing that some are going to be more valuable than others.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. I think there's one last question here we'll take from Michael. I've seen many job descriptions that have a line of text that includes, quote, insert hot topics here. Thanks. So many of us discount job descriptions as a must-have list.
Yeah, I think sometimes I think the point there maybe is what you were saying, Eric, is that some of these job descriptions are just cut and paste. They're
Yeah.
just, we don't even really, some of them are not as, and sometimes, honestly, I do a lot of searches where I don't have a job description. I just know what the role is that needs to be filled and what the talent will look like. But sometimes the job descriptions are really just a matter of formality, where they have to
Yeah.
have them for HR, and in order to have an open head count and a process that's run through HR, and then the actual role that gets filled ends up looking a lot different sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question, Michael. All right, well, we got to wrap up here. And any sort of parting insights or advice you have for folks that are job seekers right now and maybe potentially hiring managers in the future?
Absolutely. And thank you, Eric. This has been really fun. Hopefully helpful too. But
For sure.
okay, 2 things. Number one, there is a book called Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks. And for back to kind of that beginning part of our conversation about people who are transitioning in their career, I highly recommend this book. It talks about taking your skill sets and growing with them as your brain matures and evolves. And I think it's really important for those of us who are at like the midpoint in our career and we're hitting some friction with what we're doing. So that's a super helpful book for anyone looking to transition. And then we didn't really get into it. We talked a lot about relationships, but when you're in a job search, a couple of things. Number one, it is a skill to look for a job, and it's a skill that is not taught or developed in school. And so give yourself some grace that this is a skill you're developing, and you're going to learn through the process. You're going to be told no many more times than you're told yes. You only need to be told yes once. And so it's a process. So have some grace and be kind to yourself through the process. And then I can't underestimate the importance of person to person connections, especially in the field of technology. You apply online so often, which also means you get rejected so often. And it can be really demoralizing. Get back to that human connection and use that technology as a tool to find out who you should connect with and build those relationships, because that at the end of the day is likely what will get you a job. Yes, you may still have to apply online, but it might get your resume some attention, and it'll help you figure out where the jobs are that to apply to. So please, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have coffee,
Yeah.
go meet people. It as much time as you spend online searching for jobs, make sure every day that you reach out to one person to arrange a call or a coffee meeting.
One-on-one, connect in person. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
the technology is, it's sort of almost crippled us in some ways, because you can get by kind of by just staying in your office at home, or in the office, and not just interacting with screens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of going to a networking event, it's like, who does that? Why do I need to go to a networking event? Because, like, I could do this online.
Yeah.
And
One more
so,
idea too
yeah,
on that networking event.
yeah,
Volunteer at conferences. You don't have to pay to go to them if you volunteer. And then you get a list of who was there because you're volunteering. And then you can reach out to those people afterwards and say, hey, I saw you at such and such a conference. Would you be willing to take a call with me? So it's kind of a networking hack
yeah,
of ways to engage with others. And it's more fun too to engage with others, right?
yeah. I love it, for sure. Ann, thank you for spending the time here to talk with me and our audience. What's the best way for the audience to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am actually, as we're speaking, building my website after 20 years. So you all
Awesome.
can laugh at me. That's fine. So the best way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn, and my contact information is there. Feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help and opine on your situation and be helpful where I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ann. We'll put those notes in the podcast episode description when we publish it on Spotify. It'll be published in the next 2 days or so, and we'll
Great.
send everyone a link, and I'll send you a link as well, Ann. All
Thank
right,
you.
Ann. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone out there for joining us. Apologies for the stream snafu, but hopefully a lot of you folks can watch this after the fact. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk to everyone soon.
And good luck.